Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and great to have John Mittendorf back in the house with us. He's kind of our local researcher and apologist. And we've been doing a series on Israel, and today we're going to get a little bit more specific and deal with some of the temples. We look forward to that. And we'll be giving away a special DVD at the end of the program. Tell us about it, John.
You know, I know there's people that are watching and listening that have got some of these DVDs before, but they're produced by Randolph Productions, Illustra Media.
Okay.
And it's Hollywood quality from a biblical perspective on nature, the world, the universe, everything. Yeah. And they're now starting to do a new series of DVDs.
Oh, they'll play it in there, I think. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. That is called Flight, the Wonder of Birds. And then they're going to go and do Ocean and a bunch of other things. And there's the picture of it right there.
Okay.
And yeah, it's the Flight, the Genius of Birds. And so we're going to be giving that away, which is a DVD. And but I just wanted to mention real quick that if people are looking for a great idea for Christmas, you can go on the internet and go to Randolph Productions, and it'll bring up all of the DVDs that they produce and all of the trailers. And so you can watch the trailers, you know, which are about a minute long, and get an idea, and it makes a great Christmas present.
What's it called?
Randolph Productions, Illustra Media, and you can go to their trailers of all the DVDs that they produce, and they're absolutely fabulous. Nat Geo History Channel couldn't do it any better. Okay. They're fabulous. Let's bring up just a real quick trailer on this Flight of the Genius of Birds just for a couple seconds.
All right, so be listening and watching, because they're going to give this away.
Here's the bottom line. You look at the anatomy of a bird, its behavior, its metabolism, the structure of its feathers, the structure of its muscles, and so forth. These are multiple independent points in a complex space, out of which flight emerges. And I think from a biological standpoint, to fly at all requires a cause that's able to visualize a distant functional endpoint and bring together everything necessary to achieve that endpoint. Uniquely and universally in our experience, only intelligence is capable of that kind of causal process.
An engineered system is the product of a mind that anticipated a problem and figured out a multi-step way of addressing that problem. In birds, you see exactly that kind of process. They're engineering marvels. They're works of art. We know where engineered things come from. We know where works of art come from. So why would we attribute a bird to anything other than intelligence or mind?
Wow. Beautiful, John. All right, so that is a DVD on Flight. We're going to be giving that away coming up and towards the end of the program. So be listening, or be watching, and we'll tell you how to get your name in the hat real quick. All right, John.
Now.
Yeah, the temples. All right, we've been dealing a lot with Israel, but now we're into the temples. And so walk us through this, because there's some fascinating thing. And I hope we get to the one slide. Let me see if you got it in here. You do, okay. Because I've been pumping that slide all morning. All right, go ahead.
But you know, after we did our series on Israel, and you know, Palestinians and all that stuff that went along with that, I had some people say, well, you know, why don't you talk a little bit about the temples? And you and I did a program on that I went back and I looked, and it was about 4 years ago.
Not long ago.
Yeah, it was.
We both had hair, and it was dark.
Tie flight. Maybe that was before television too, you know, the great radio voices. Yeah. So at any rate, I went back and I looked, and a lot of things have changed from the Jewish perspective on rebuilding of the temple on the Temple Mount, which we're going to cover in December. Okay. And so I thought I would use this morning just to go through and talk about the history of the temples, starting with the tabernacle, and going up to by the way, how many temples does the Bible mention?
Say
5.
What? I was going to say 5.
Were you?
Yeah, I was.
Oh,
I was
man.
just thinking in my head, I would think 4 or 5, yeah.
Yeah,
It's 5.
Actually, it's 5, and if you want to count the tabernacle as a temple too, you know. But actually, there's 5. There's 4 temples it mentions, and then the tabernacle would be the 5th, you know, and that's close enough, I think, for concert work.
Okay.
So I thought we would just overview the temples real quick this morning because there's really some cool stuff. In fact, as I was studying for this, I was listening to your program about a week ago with Dr. Dan Tomlinson. He was talking about Christ in the Old Testament, which I don't think we tend to focus on very much. We tend to think of, well, Israel's Old Testament, Christ is the New Testament. But Dr. Dan was saying, oh, no. Christ is all the way through the Old Testament.
And all 39 books of the Old Testament?
Yeah, and when we get into this, I think you're going to see, particularly the tabernacle in the desert, is exactly a picture of Christ in the New Testament. We'll get to that in just a minute.
All right.
So then in December, I want to, after we do this quick preview this morning, then talk about the really good stuff, and that is the rebuilding of the temple on the Temple Mount today. And a question, just as a little teaser again, can they rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount today, let's say 2015, without moving the Dome of the Rock?
Well, I'm going to say that the walls are going to be real close. Right?
Well, it appears as though they can do it.
Okay.
And we're going to explain why that is now true because of archaeology and excavations. And also the Jews are very, very close. When I say very, very close, I'll explain that in a second, to having all the elements ready for the rebuilding of the temple. And the one element that the 2 elements that they don't have, one of them is a question mark, and that's the Ark of the Covenant. The last time the Bible mentioned that was in Solomon's time.
Yeah.
Never mentioned it after that. So where is it? That's a good question. But the other thing is the water of purification for purifying everything in the temple before it's ever used. And one of the elements that's necessary for that is the ashes from a red heifer. That's a red cow.
Right.
And according to the internet, in June of this year, it was announced that a red heifer was born in the United States of America that meets all the qualifications.
So that becomes the breeding stock.
That becomes the breeding stock, and or they have to wait a couple years to make sure not 1 or 2 hairs that are not red show up on the animal. If 1 or 2 hairs show up that are not red, the animal is disqualified. But we'll get to that next month. Because there's really been some cool stuff happening in the background. Okay, let's talk about and start off with the temples. And I think it's no big surprise that the purpose of the temples is the divine presence of God and also a specific place to offer sacrifices. But then when you talk about the temples, I think we have to start up, and let me see if I can bring up this right here. Yeah. And that is a classic example of the first temple per se, which was a mobile temple, which was served as the Israelites' temple in the desert for 40 years. And as you know, tabernacle means sanctuary or place of dwelling. You know, just as a quickie, it was 75 feet wide by 150 feet long, and then you had this linen fence around it. Mm-hmm. And the 3 articles that we're looking at is the brazen altar, the brazen laver right here, which is where they washed their hands. And then when they walked into this tent, then you had the holy place, and then behind that you had the Holy of Holies. And looking at that, you know, I've kind of a simplistic perspective. I'm thinking, you know, every time the Israelites had to move in the desert, and they moved for 40 years, they had to pack all their stuff up, and then they had to move, and then they had to set that stuff up again for 40 years. Wow. So yeah, that's just not a little tent. But I think the one thing that is really interesting about this, and particularly to me, and we talk about, again, Christ in the Old Testament, is Numbers 2:2 is very specific on how the tribes of Israel were supposed to be placed around the tabernacle. In the middle, which is the middle of the cross, when you view this from the top, and here are the tribes of Israel placed around the tabernacle, which is where?
In the middle.
In the middle.
Right.
Exactly right. Of the cross. That when you view this from the top, it's a symbol of a cross. Right. It's a symbol of a cross.
Yeah, I didn't know they had drones in those days, but there's a picture of it.
And then around this 1, 2, 3, 4, that is the tribe of Levi. And Levi had 2 purposes, believe it or not. Number 1 was they were in charge of the temple, to run the temple, and secondly, it was to keep the wrath of God from destroying Israel. Wow. That's why they were placed around the tabernacle.
Okay.
But it's fascinating that when you look at that, if you could have looked at it from the top, with the drone, you would have seen the cross.
Well, for those listening on the radio, let me encourage you to get these notes, because John has made these notes available. In fact, you can go to hispeoplerejoice.com and he'll send you these notes. This particular slide, this particular picture is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I've never seen this before. And yet, when you study the tabernacle and the moving of the children of Israel in the desert and how they'd have to set up and how the tribes were divided, this is absolutely fascinating.
It's fascinating. And this is in Numbers, starts in chapter 2, and it goes through very specifically. It talks about all the tribes. In fact, in Numbers, it gives you the number of people that were in the tribes.
Each tribe, right.
At that time. That's exactly right,
and
yeah.
by the way, huge amounts.
Yeah. And when I thought about this, Perry, and as I said, sometimes I kind of think outside the box a little bit, maybe more than I should. But you're probably talking close to 1 million people or more than 1 million people. That when you start thinking about the sanitation on the desert, the water, of course the food was manna, we're not talking about a small deal marching through the desert for 40 years.
Right.
And of course, as you know from the Bible too, that once the temple was set up, then God came down, the mercy seat inside, Shekinah glory, was a pillar of smoke over the tabernacle by day, correct?
Yeah.
And when the pillar of smoke moved, it was time for them to move, which means was not only a visual display of God, but it was also a visual display that God was within His people, had come to tabernacle with His people. Now, at night, what'd they do in place of the column of smoke?
Yeah, the clouds. Oh, the
you
fire.
had the pillar of fire.
Yeah,
you had
right.
the pillar of fire.
Okay, you're right.
And when I also look at that, Perry, I thought, it's interesting that I think if you were to see something like this at night, the tabernacle with the pillar of fire on top of that, of course this is just an artist's rendering of that you would say, God is here. But it didn't take long before it just became common knowledge to Israel. In fact, it wasn't long before they started complaining about being out in the desert. They wanted to go back to Egypt and eat all the goodies, all the food that was available to them. And of course, the manna wasn't good enough after a while, but yet day after day after day, here's God's faithfulness, the pillar of smoke by day and the pillar of fire by night. And when it moved, they moved. Fascinating.
It's just mind-boggling.
It's exactly right. One thing that I found I thought was very interesting, that the tabernacle is an illustration of God as it appears in the New Testament. John 1:14, it says, "The Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us." And the word dwelling in the New Testament is the same word as tabernacle in the Old Testament.
Wow.
Did you know that?
No.
So God came in living flesh to dwell or tabernacle among His people during the 40 years in the desert. Now, if we apply that to the New Testament, as applied to His 33 years on this earth, Jesus Christ fulfilled the picture of the Old Testament tabernacle.
Wow.
With His 33 years on earth.
Perfect. All right, let me take a quick break. We'll be back. And again, if you want copies of these notes, and for those listening on radio, let me encourage you to kind of write this on your sleeve with your Sharpie this morning. And when you get to work, order it up. hispeoplerejoice.com. Oh, excuse me, hispeoplerejoice@gmail.com. I'm sorry, hispeoplerejoice@gmail.com. And John will send you a copy of these notes. Just the illustrations in it alone are just fabulous. Take a look at it. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Okay, we're back with John Mittendorf, and we're going through the temples of Israel, and there were 5 if you want to call the ark or the
tabernacle.
The tabernacle as one, and fascinating. And again, let me encourage you, folks, really take advantage of this. Go to hispeoplerejoice@gmail.com and send John an email, and he will send you back these notes with the illustrations in them. And you have to look at illustration number 2. I'm just mesmerized by it. I went to Bible college and I never saw that.
But it's in Numbers, very specifically.
Yeah, but I've
by
never
verse.
saw it in a illustrated form.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and so anyway, you need to take a look at that. All right, the very first temple is.
Now we go to the actual first temple, and I love this drawing because, as you know, when David became king, now we're in Israel. Okay, now we want a stationary building. But God would not allow David to build the temple because he was a man of war and he had shed blood. But God did allow David to start collecting the materials for the temple, and then Solomon was responsible for building the temple. And the picture that I have on the screen is what they feel that the temple looked like, and basically that comes right out of the Bible. But there's several things that I want to point out about this. In that, you remember the film Jurassic Park, and when he brought the archaeologist,
No.
okay, when he brought the archaeologist there, they're going, "Wow, this is awesome," and he goes, "We spared no expense."
Yeah, right.
Solomon spared no expense on building this. In fact, he went into debt a little bit about this, and the Bible is clear that he owed the king of Hiram some towns as payback. Because of some of the things that were financing this. But anyway, just a couple things about this. The entire inside of the temple was gold. Floors, ceilings, walls. And at today's monetary value, he used 3,000 tons of gold valued, and I just picked $340 per ounce because, you know, the price of gold is all over the place. You know, for a while it was up to almost 2,000. That's $128 billion. 30,000 tons of silver with a current value of $26 billion. That's almost that's a little over $150 billion. And Josephus records the temple's walls and floors were covered in gold, as well as numerous items that were made from solid, pure gold. And if you look at the drawing, the back portion of the building is the Holy of Holies, and of course you have the two large cherubims at the back, and in between the cherubims is the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah. The cherubims had a wingspan of 15 feet each, so that gives you an idea of the size of that room. Solid gold.
You know what's amazing to me? I mean, not only the magnificence of this, and it's almost beyond our ability to comprehend.
Right.
But it's true.
It is true.
Okay, it's
true. Exactly right.
You would think, with all of the archaeology going on today, that they would find that gold somewhere.
Well, there's
a lot of gold.
Well, the Bible does talk about what happened to all that gold. Because, you know, the temple was destroyed, and we'll get this in a little bit, but then the Israelites came back after the Babylonian captivity and they rebuilt the temple again. And then Herod came in and dramatically increased the grandeur and the size of the temple. And remember when Jesus was standing outside the temple with his disciples and he said, "This building will be torn down and not one stone will be upon the other." You know why he said that?
Because they turned it into a marketplace.
No. This is when the Romans came in and burned it 70 A.D.
Oh, okay.
See, I'm going through history now a little bit.
I'm not tracking with you.
Okay, so well, we're going to get to that. We're jumping ahead here a little bit. But when the Romans finally burned the temple in 70 A.D., all the gold melted and ran down around all of the stones in the temple. As a result, the Romans did what? Tore it apart stone by stone by stone to take the gold out of the temple. That's where all the gold went.
All right, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
so we're talking at today's market value, $128 billion in gold, $26 billion in silver.
That's about $150 billion just for the interior of the temple, not counting the outside. Now, I want to talk about, just briefly, a couple of interesting things because you knew that I was going to bring ancient technology into this just a little bit, right?
Of course.
About how smart, about how smart they were back then.
Well, how'd they get the stones piled up and all that stuff?
First of all, you have the lavers around the outside. There's 10 of them. There's 5 on this side, and there's 5 on this side, and that's what they used to wash their hands with. But to me, the most interesting part is the Great Molten Sea, which looks like a large swimming pool that's sitting on the back of 12 oxen, you know, 3 face south, 3 face north, and so on. They figure that held somewhere between 12 to 15,000 gallons of water. That's about the size of a swimming pool. And the Bible is very clear that, well, first of all, when you look at that, you think, well, why do they need so much water in the temple? Well, the Bible talks about that on the day that the temple was consecrated, it went into operation, that Solomon sacrificed 120,000 sheep and 22,000 oxen. Think about that for a minute. How do they get all the animals in, kill them, and then out, and then keep the place clean because of all the sacrificial system that's going on? That's 120,000 sheep and 22,000 oxen.
Wow.
That's about 150,000 animals that were sacrificed on the first day that the temple was consecrated. So what they needed, and we're going to get to this next month when we talk about the system they had in place under the Temple Mount. What they needed was a large amount of water to come into the temple to make it operational. And the first thing they had was this great molten sea, which is on the outside, which held about 15,000 gallons of water. And they had an aqueduct system that came way from the hills east of Jerusalem that came in just to feed the water needs of the temple. And what's fascinating is they still have parts of the aqueduct in place, and the aqueduct was a sealed system because the aqueduct started high, went down to the valleys, came back up in the mountains. So it actually, the water system, it created its own pressure through a siphoning action into the temple from the hills far away from Jerusalem. Yeah. Also, this temple, the Bible is very clear that Hiram was, I'm going to say, he was petitioned by Solomon to cast this out of solid bronze. And the Bible says it was clear bronze. That means that he cast that in a singular casting. If you do it in layers, it is not a clear casting. You're going to have layer, layer, layer. It's a clear casting. How did Hiram, back in that time, 1000 BC, cast a 72-ton swimming pool out of clear bronze and then transport it to the temple?
Well, ancient technology.
So you see what's going on here? Yeah. This just isn't some little building that they built on top of the Temple Mount. They also, the foundation stones, let me read this section right out of Dr. Grant Jeffrey's book. Some of the foundation stones for the first temple weigh up to 1,000, and by the way, he was underneath the Temple Mount. And you know, we've interviewed him in the past before. He's been there and actually touched the foundation stones for Solomon's temple. Some of the stones weigh up to 1,000 tons and are fitted together so perfectly that it's impossible to place even a razor blade between them. Where have you heard that before? Yeah. The Egyptian pyramids. Modern machinery, including cranes and helicopters, would be unable to transport these stones the 1 mile distance from the quarry where they were excavated to their ultimate location, 65 feet beneath the current surface of the Temple Mount.
Wow.
And then, of course, when Herod came along, when they rebuilt the temple again after the Babylonian captivity, and then Herod expanded on that, they just used the foundation stones that were already there. So that's why they're called Herod's foundation. And then mathematics, this one is really surprising. If you take the circumference of the Great Molten Sea, the circumference of the sea, and divide it by the diameter, the result is pi, 3.14. Who was the smartest man in history? Solomon. And it's interesting that history records that Archimedes discovered pi around 250 BC. Wow. Yet Solomon knew what it was back at 1000 BC.
Wow.
Little ancient technology.
Mind-boggling stuff. It's great. I love
Just
it.
a simple little temple on the Temple Mount, right?
All right. How long did it take him to build this one?
About 46 years. Yeah, I think it was 46. Don't quote me on that, Perry.
Yeah.
It's in the notes somewhere, and I'll see if I can find it at our next break.
Okay, so you had two pillars at 55 tons each.
Yes.
2 caps at 20 tons each.
Now these are all clear bronze.
Yeah.
And the interior, in other words, all these artifacts you see around the outside of the temple, these small lavers, the Great Molten Sea, the altar of sacrifice, which, by the way, was 15 feet off the ground. That's 30 by 30. That's a large. You know, if you're going to be sacrificing oxen up there, this is not a small operation.
Right.
And 120,000 oxen, I might say, or 22,000 oxen, 120,000 sheep. When you look at the grandeur of this, and then when you walked inside the temple, when you're talking about solid gold inside the temple, walls, floors, ceiling, and the temple's about 40 feet high. That's a lot of gold.
Wow, we got to take a break. Fascinating stuff. And again, folks, whether you're listening on radio or watching on TV, you need to get these notes because they do have colored illustrations, and it really brings us out. You can go to hispeoplerejoice@gmail.com, and John will send you those notes. And boy, it's just really great information. Again, hispeoplerejoice@gmail.com. Let me ask you one quick question as we go into the break.
Shoot.
Do you think they'll find the Ark of the Covenant?
Yes, because if the new temple is going to be rebuilt, either right before or right after the beginning of the tribulation, and of course the Antichrist comes in and desecrates it, the half period, 3.5 years, what is really the focus of the temple?
The Ark of the Covenant.
It's the Holy of Holies and the Ark of the Covenant, where God's Shekinah glory comes down. So the answer would be yes.
All right, there you go. You heard it here on the Dove. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Okay, we're back, and John Mittendorf's with us, and we're doing a study on the temples of Jerusalem. And by the way, I just want to remind you, I know this sounds like a broken record, but I just can't emphasize this enough. John has done incredible homework, and he wants to give you all this information absolutely free. So just go to hispeoplerejoice@gmail.com, hispeoplerejoice@gmail.com, and he will send you back the notes in a file and with the illustrations and everything in it. And it makes for great Bible study, makes for great personal reading, and this whole series about the temples is fascinating. All right, we went through the first temple. Now let's get into the second temple. So this was destroyed. This one was destroyed.
Right, that was destroyed, and the Israels were taken captive by the Babylonians.
Okay, and all the gold was melted down, and the Romans took off with it.
Well, no, that's going to be this temple.
Oh, okay.
That temple was destroyed, but what Jesus was referring to was when, and let me bring this up for you. This one right here. This is the rebuilt temple. This would be the second temple after the Babylonian captivity. The Jews rebuilt it, and then King Herod came in and made it to what you see in a picture. Significantly increased the beauty and the size and the grandeur of it, and we're back to the gold again inside the temple.
So did he get the gold from the first one and hold on to it?
You know, I could not find in all my studies what happened to the gold out of the first one. I don't know.
Okay.
But I do know that when Christ stood in front of this temple with his disciples, he said that there will, and it was at that time considered one of the great wonders of the world. And he said, not one stone will be left upon another. And his disciples couldn't believe it. They're looking at this magnificent edifice, and they're going, well, what are you talking about? Well, then the Romans came in and burned it. And that's when all the gold inside melted, went down around the stones. And of course, the Romans tore it apart stone by stone to get the gold. And that's basically where the gold went.
Well, let me just say a little bit of a side note. If you ever go to Jerusalem, you can go up to the Temple Mount and walk around. Now, up there is the Dome of the Rock, which is just to the south of where this platform is. Mm-hmm. But when I was up there, I stood there, and I couldn't find the words. You know, to think that you're standing where the temple, you're standing on the Temple Mount where these temples were, and there's nothing there. It's flat now.
Right.
It's just flat rock.
It's 35-acre plateau.
Yeah. And there it is, and you will kind of walk around, and you're kind of stunned. But then you look over your shoulder, and there's the Dome of the Rock, capped in gold. And I thought, well, you know.
There's Satan's counterfeit.
You know, there's Satan's counterfeit.
But you know, when you stand on top of the Temple Mount, Perry, you're standing where David stood. You're standing where Solomon stood.
Yeah.
You're standing where the Babylonians and the Romans stood and all that went on with that. You're standing where Israel stood. And then when Israel came back and they rebuilt the temple, and for the people that are listening and not watching, what you're looking at is this temple edifice that has a huge wall that goes around it with the inner courts and all that has to do with that, and of course all the gold and the bronze and everything they would have used at that time. And as I said, it was considered one of the wonders of the world at that time. but you're also talking about standing where Christ stood, and that's exactly, in fact, I put this in the notes. This is the fulfillment of Matthew 24:2, where Jesus stated, "Not one stone here shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down." And when the Romans came in 70 A.D. and burned that, that's exactly what happened. They took that apart stone by stone to get all of the gold, in other words, all the metal that was worth money out of it at that time.
Now, this was primarily done after they returned from Babylonia.
The Babylonian captivity, right. That was 400 years captivity.
Yeah, so it's just magnificent.
Yeah.
All right, so the Romans come in 70 A.D., they completely destroy it, which fulfills the prophecy that Jesus gave.
Exactly right, and that's where we're up to today, because now the Temple Mount, there's no Jewish temple up there, and now you have the Dome of the Rock up there, which is Satan's counterfeit, sitting right in the middle of the Temple Mount. And so that would take us then to what would be classified as the third temple, and I don't have a picture of that.
Okay.
Because the third temple is called the Tribulation Temple or the Antichrist Temple. And as you know, the Bible is very clear that at the 3.5 year, the half period, midpoint of the tribulation, which is 7 years, that's 3.5 years, the Antichrist is going to walk into the temple and desecrate it. In order for the Antichrist to do that, there has to be a temple there. So somewhere, and the Bible does not say if there's going to be a temple built right before the tribulation, at the beginning of the tribulation, right after the beginning of the tribulation. But what's clear is there has to be a temple at the mid-year point of the tribulation so the Antichrist can defile it.
All right, now, making that statement, a lot of these things are being gathered up, right?
Correct.
Can you give us an update on that?
Well, I'm getting ahead of ourselves.
Well, just tease us a little bit.
Okay, I'll tease you just a little bit. They now know through Y chromosomes that they can specifically isolate out of the Jewish population the Levite tribe.
Really?
So yes, and it's called...
Now, that was the tribe immediately around... No, that was...
The Levite tribe was specifically charged with being the priests of the temple, running the temple.
Right. And they were the
and
guardians
through
of it,
modern
yeah.
DNA, they have, it's called a Y chromosome tracer. They can go back and go into the Jewish population and they can tell you if this person was a descendant of the original Levite tribe or not. As a result, they are currently training Levite tribe people to be the curators of the new temple. It'll be on the Temple Mount. We talked about the red heifer just for a little bit. They also, a lot of people are not aware of, and I put the picture of it in the notes, most people are aware of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which was 1948 in Qumran, Jordan. 1953, they also discovered a copper scroll. On the copper scroll, there was reference to an object in cave, and I've seen two figures on it. It's either cave 13 or cave 8. But they went to this cave and dug down 3 feet, and here was a jar of a gelatinous type substance. They took it to the University of Israel, and it turns out to be the exact oil of anointing that was used previous to Christ.
How would they know that, I wonder?
Because the Bible tells you the 5, and we'll talk about this more next, and by the way, we're going to be talking about this on the 11th of December in detail. The Bible gives you the 5 specific elements that were in the oil of anointing. Those were the 5 exact elements that were in that gelatinous substance that were in that.
Will there be sacrifices in the new temple being built?
Yes.
So they're gearing up for that too?
Yes.
Just as they did in Bible times, where they do open animal sacrifice?
Just as the same in Bible times, there's also going to be sacrifices in the millennial temple, believe it or not.
Wow. And the whole world will have to find out what that means, huh?
And the whole world will have to find out what that means. Is exactly right.
Wow. All right, so...
There's a lot going on here just with temples, isn't there?
Well, more than perhaps we realize.
Yeah, exactly right.
Why does Israel feel compelled to do this?
Because, well, to me, Perry, it's a part of their DNA. It goes right back to the Exodus. By the way, did you know that there is a film coming out next month, Exodus? major film. Now, what it's, I just saw a part of the trailer, and the part of the trailer that you watch looks like it's right out of the Bible. Now, whether it's going to be another film like Noah or not, I don't know. Yeah. But it's called the Exodus. At any rate, when you talk about Israel exiting Egypt and all that meant to them, of course, they had to wander in the desert for 40 years and all of that. They're 40 years in the desert. Actually, they built the tabernacle 1 year after they had been in the desert. So let's say 39 years. Throughout Israel's history, they've always had a temple. And that is where they met, and God met with them in their midst. The Shekinah glory of God and the Ark of the Covenant, the pillar of smoke, the pillar of fire, and all it has to do with that. God was in their midst visibly. And then when the Romans conquered them in 70 A.D. and burned the temple, they've never had a temple since. Do they want another temple to where they can have God in their midst? Absolutely.
Of course, that will incense the Islamic community.
Oh boy, yeah, exactly.
I mean,
right.
it'll just, you know, set them fire.
Yeah.
So when they build the, I got a question, it'll take a break, but when they build the new temple before it's destroyed,
okay,
does the Bible talk about the Shekinah glory coming in at that time?
Let me go back and let me think just for a second on that. Now, you're talking about the temple on the Temple Mount that will be there during the tribulation.
Right, before it's destroyed.
I don't think it does.
Because you're telling me that the fire doesn't come until after it's destroyed.
What do you mean the fire doesn't come until
the presence
after it's
of God,
destroyed?
right?
Yes. When the tabernacle was replaced by Solomon's temple, the pillar of smoke moved from the tabernacle to the Shekinah of glory over Solomon's temple. Correct.
Right.
Now, was the pillar of smoke there for the second temple, including the one that Herod built? I don't remember seeing that.
Okay. But the one that they're going to build, which is, I mean, the purpose of building it is to get the presence of God back.
Right. Now, according to the Bible, the last time the Ark of the Covenant is mentioned is during the time of Solomon. The Ark of the Covenant is never mentioned after Solomon. So they don't know, when I say they, scholars,
so they don't know if it was in the second temple.
They don't know if it was in the second temple or not. See?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
All right, you can see how fascinating this is. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. And don't want to go away, because we'll tell you how you can maybe win that beautiful DVD about flight. And again, if you want these notes, go to hispeoplerejoice@gmail.com. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. You know, compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Welcome back. We're doing a fascinating study about the temples, and again, these notes John's making totally available free. They're color and has the illustrations in them. So just send him an email at hispeoplerejoice@gmail.com, and he'll send you a copy of these notes back. All right, so we did Solomon's, we did the second temple, which is...
Well, let's go all the way back. We had the tabernacle first. Then we go to the first temple. That's Solomon's temple. Then we go to the second temple, which would be the Jewish people rebuilt it when they came back from their captivity. But then Herod made it a lot bigger and better. Then the third temple would be the tribulation temple, so to speak. That's going to be rebuilt so it's there during the tribulation.
All right, then the fourth temple.
Okay, then we have the fourth temple. And the fourth temple is at the second coming of Christ. Significant topographical changes will occur in Jerusalem to accommodate the immense millennial temple. And the specifics on that, Perry, are in Ezekiel 40 through 48. Christ will build, when he returns again, he puts his foot on the Mount of Olives, the Mount of Olives splits. The whole topography totally changes. And just north of Israel, Christ is going to build the millennial temple, which will be there during the millennial reign for 1,000 years. In Ezekiel 40 to 48, it is very, in fact, let me bring up a picture right here. The Bible is very clear on how this is going to be built. It's going to be 1 mile square, and all of the nations will come through this building to worship Christ. But what's interesting about the millennial kingdom is there's still going to be people that even when Christ is reigning and ruling perfectly, that still will deny him. And of course, then they get together with the devil at the end of the 1,000 years, and of course, that's the final battle. But the millennial temple, as I said, that's in Ezekiel 40 to 48. It will be the center of worship for the world during the millennium, and you can find that in Micah and Isaiah.
1 mile square.
1 mile square, exactly right.
And so Christ builds it.
Christ builds it. They're going to reinstitute. In fact, I wrote it down.
Does he have to use any union workers? Or does he have to get a permit?
Let's see.
Will he have to get a permit to build this?
They're going to reinstitute the sacrificial system in the temple, which is amazing.
Wow.
But Christ is going to be the high priest.
Wow.
The high priest. Then
the 5th temple
comes the end of the millennium, which is 1,000 years. What happens now? Okay. This is replaced by the eternal temple. And what's the eternal temple? And I thought you'd never ask.
Christ in you, the hope of glory.
Well, the eternal temple will occupy the New Jerusalem throughout the balance of eternity. You can find that in Revelation 21. And this is what John declares in Revelation 21 when he was taken in his vision up to heaven. And look at it. What he says in Revelation 21, he saw no temple there. In other words, there's no physical temple. What is the physical temple then? And then John adds, for the Lord God the Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. That is the eternal temple, is the Lord God himself. And we're going to be the priests. God is going to be the high priest.
Wow. Wow. Fascinating, isn't it? Fascinating. All right. Well, and there is a pretty good, if that doesn't move you, I don't know what does, but that is pretty interesting. And I never looked at it that way. He didn't see a temple, but then he saw Christ as the temple.
Yep. And
now there's a picture
I brought up this last picture because on the 11th of next month, we're going to take the program. We're going to talk about the Temple Mount. And of course, this is a picture of it. And of course, right in the middle of the Temple Mount sits the Dome of the Rock. And so the question is, as we've talked a little bit this morning, is can the new temple or the third temple be rebuilt on the Temple Mount without anything happening to the Dome of the Rock?
Well, I would say yes, but I'm trying to think how that picture is viewed. Is it here?
No, it's over here. I'm going to have, next month I'll have some different viewpoints.
Okay, I'm having a hard time.
Well, sometimes photographs tend to compress things and you don't really see it. I've got a picture that I'll show next month that's taken from the top, and then you'll see a lot more spatial dimensions better than you see in this one. But through excavations, and today they know exactly where the Eastern Gate is. And that, along with some other things we'll talk about, they feel very confident that they can build the new temple on the Temple Mount without doing anything to the Dome of the Rock. In fact, Jewish law dictates that if anything happens to the Dome of the Rock, it has to be rebuilt back to its original standards. That's Jewish law, which is somewhat complicated. Before the last break, you asked me what have they done to prepare to build the new temple. You can go on the internet to sanhedrin.org or .com and bring up the blueprints of the new temple that are all drawn and ready to go. But one of the things that I found fascinating, other than the oil of anointing, by the way, Christ was never anointed when he was here. He'll be anointed when he comes back and puts his foot in the Mount of Olives. And if what the Jewish Sanhedrin is saying is they have the same oil that they used over 2,000 years ago to anoint him and the temple. They have the water of purification ready to go. But who is responsible for the temple, the building, and the administration of it? It's the Sanhedrin. The same Sanhedrin that you read about along with the Pharisees in the Old Testament.
Right.
The Sanhedrin was disbanded. back then. The Sanhedrin was reinstituted in 2004.
Okay.
So the Sanhedrin is currently in place and ready to administer the new temple.
They're being trained, obviously.
Yes. So is the Levite tribe.
All right. Now, the one thing that's so obvious to me is that, let's just fast forward and say that new temple's sitting there.
Okay.
You got the new temple
Mm-hmm.
and the Dome of the Rock.
Yep. And there's going to be
Isn't that the final conflict?
Yeah. And, you know, well, Perry, that's why some scholars, because the Bible doesn't say, the Bible just says there has to be a temple there by the midpoint of the tribulation. And some scholars, they go crazy over trying to figure all this out, you know, when is the temple going to be there? But I think you can see that an answer to that, which is a possibility, that when the Antichrist signs the agreement with Israel and all the nations and takes over, that he then would have the power to let the Jews rebuild their new temple and have it for 3.5 years. If the Antichrist is the ruler of the world at that time, correct?
Yeah.
Then he could do it. If the new temple, unless something dramatically changes, if the new temple was rebuilt prior to the tribulation, you're right, there's going to be a lot of unhappy people.
Yeah, because you got to wonder how in the world could they coexist. I mean,
right.
If Israel went up there today and tried to build that, wouldn't there be just like
it wouldn't happen. In fact, Israel now cannot go underneath the Temple Mount and excavate, even though that's their property. Why? Because the Temple Mount is administrated by the Waqf, which is a Jordanian Islamic trust, believe it or not, which Ariel Sharon allowed them to do right after the Six-Day War in the interest of being a good guy, and they perceived it as being weak, and so they don't let the Israelis hardly even walk up there.
All right, so infrastructure being what it is, I guess they can go ahead and just build. They don't have to do anything else, huh?
As long as the red heifer is in place. Because the red heifer supplies, they have to sacrifice the red heifer outside. By the way, we'll get to this next month, but the red heifer is sacrificed outside of Jerusalem. Why? Because Christ was sacrificed outside of Jerusalem. And then the ashes are made into the water of purification, and the Bible tells you what 5 elements that's comprised of, and then they purify the temple and all the elements that are used in the temple. Well, you can't do that unless you have the water purification. You can't have the water purification unless you have the ashes, the red heifer.
Wow.
See? It's a little complicated, isn't it?
Well, it's complicated, but it's fascinating. You kind of where we are, because, you know, I think the problem with all of us, we want to put timelines on these things.
Right, yeah.
You know,
when are they going to build?
When are they going to do it?
The temple, yeah, that's exactly right.
I mean, we may see it in our lifetime, we may not. We don't know.
Correct.
But the point is that everything leading up to it is there.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
in place.
In place.
Yeah, and the Jews are serious about rebuilding the temple. And you asked a great question: why are they so focused on a new temple? Because that goes all the way back to their history and their exodus out of Egypt.
Well, it justifies them.
It justifies them, and that is where God meets them in their midst.
All right. Well, folks, again, all of these notes, and they are comprehensive and very well done, are available by you going to hispeoplerejoice@gmail.com, and John will send you a copy of those notes. So get them. They're just terrific. All right, we're going to give away a video. It's a DVD.
It's the
again,
Genius
give me
of
about
Flight.
30 seconds of it.
Mm-hmm.
No, 30 seconds. What is it?
It's the flight, The Genius of Birds.
It's wonderful. All right. To caller number 4 at 541-776-5368. 541-776-5368. Caller number 4 will win that beautiful video on flight. Thank you, John. I can't wait till next go around, because you're going to get in specific of the temple, huh?
I think people are going to be amazed at what's underneath the Temple Mount also.
Yeah, because I do know they're crawling around in there a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. All right, thanks, buddy. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.
You bet. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jim and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us.